So good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so I think we can start. This morning we have a presentation, a circular talk on from local to global, how procurement could drive a just transition. So we bring together the world of circularity together with the social aspects. First of all, I would like to ask you to switch off your microphone and camera. And if you have a question during the panel discussion, you can raise your hand or you can put your question already in the chat. And to be sure, the webinar will be recorded, so you can also see it afterwards at the page of the stakeholder platform. So I now would like to give the floor to Peter Schmidt, a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, who will do the opening of this session.
Thank you very much, Verle. Welcome and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of Circularity. I would like to start with thanking the organizers to organize this circular talk, and the circular talks are already a quite well-established rounds or format where we have a huge exchange on circular economy itself. My name is Peter Schmidt. I'm the current president of the so-called NAT section. You see that behind. This is one of the 6 sections from the European Economic and Social Committee. And since I was one of the co-founders of this of the circular economy platform, allow me to go a bit into the founding, that people understand what is the purpose and why we are so keen to drive the circular economy. And this goes back to 2016 when we launched together with the Commission this idea, the project. We must have a platform of platforms where regionally I mean Europe in that case, can drivers of circular economy can come together and have an exchange and share their experiences in driving towards the circular economy. And we didn't expect in the beginning that this will be such a success factor as it is right now. So we have already around 700 good examples on the website. So that's why I invite you all, go to the website, put your examples on the website, have the exchange with the people. And I said regionally, because this website, this platform is already well known globally. So was recently in New York, and they recognize this platform as a lighthouse for them in order to make New York circular. So that means this platform is really a good instrument in order to go to this circularity. So, and the title today is from local to global, and I am happy to see that you said how procurement could drive a just transition, not can or could procurement drive the just transition. I would rather say how procurement must drive the just transition, because I think it is a must that we must use the procurement in all the facets. Either it is on the municipalities or it goes to the national procurement or European procurement. And in addition, the private procurement is also a very important factor to drive the just transition. Since I'm a trade unionist, I'm a German trade unionist my whole life, as you can imagine, this subject is not only close to my heart, this is my heart. I think if we do not come with a clear idea what just transition means and what is necessary in this transition for the people, we will fail. This must be clear. We see some developments, some scaring developments globally. I don't want to look at too much to Brazil or so. Whenever it comes to things where the people have to get out of their comfort zone, sometimes people are resistant. We have to understand. And if we do not manage that the people see the advantages of the transition, they won't follow. That's a logic which I fully understand, because my members say, okay, Peter, tell me, so if I should go this way, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my salary? What does it mean for my family? Can I stay where I am if we have a transition? So, and that's why we must give answers. One of the answers is in this just transition, in this procurement for just transition, that companies and especially official public procurement is focusing on the social aspect, means collective bargaining, collective agreements. Do they stick to all the rules which we established globally for social aspects, the fundamental pillar of social rights, for instance? Is this implemented? So these are key elements which we have to tackle with. That's why I'm really happy, and I don't want to take too much time from you. I was told I have half an hour to talk. I don't stress this. Don't worry. So I'm really happy that we have this today's circular talk. I wish you all a fruitful and inspiring exchange. I have already seen that there's a lot of content and a lot of real interesting content which we'll provide it today. And happy to join you. And back to you, Vele. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much for your opening words. It's very dynamic, and it will help us to create this webinar as a good starting point. So I would continue with the agenda. First we will start with the global theory. We will look at the broader story, and that is Cynthia who is going to present this. And then we will go into some specific cases from Europe and from Mongolia. And then, of course, it's also important to look at the legislation. So Jenny will present this, and then we go into a panel discussion with some interaction from all of you. And finally, we will go to the spatial chats. Just a couple of words of the leadership group on circular procurement. So we are a group of 38 members looking to exchange information, new insights, but also topics that are not tackled yet, and topics that have some discussion, some new insights. They need extra input also from you. And therefore, we organized already several circular talks, and we work also together with the Interreg North Sea Region ProCirc project, in which policy and learning lessons are shared. Everyone is also invited to the final conference May 11th in Brussels, where you can see that from specific cases in which as well social as circular aspects are important, but also the measurement of how can we see the impact of this kind of circularity and procurement in our work. So today we will go from circular procurement, and we will look at how as it links with the social aspects. So it's important that the ambitions, circularity is not the goal. It's a means for a good world, for a good and social and environmental world. And one example of this ambition is a circular business model from the Papillon project, which is a project that helps people in poverty by giving the opportunity to have the best energy efficient tools like washing machines or refrigerators, but only paying for the use and not for the whole machine, the expensive machine. But that's enough for me. I would like to also introduce my colleague Alexandra. She's new in our team, and she is also co-hosting the leadership group, and she will bring you through the whole webinar. Yes.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have the honor today to introduce you to our speakers, and I will jump right in. We are very happy to have with us our first speaker, Cynthia Reynolds. Cynthia Reynolds is the founder and systems architect of Circular Region, the flagship initiative of Locals.global, based in Norway, which is a United Nations registered partnership supporting the SDGs, where they are developing a suite of practical and effective tools for individuals and organizations supporting systemic place-based innovation for circular economy. Cynthia, could you please share your screen and presentation with us?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and let me just share my screen. Are you seeing that, Alexandra?
I am.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, today I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. I'm going to be providing a preview of the Circularity for All hierarchy. It supports a communication of priorities for a circular economy with a just transition for all, bridging the global north and south, using policies and economic incentives as levers to strategically transform resources and revitalize the global economy through shared norms and values. This, as I mentioned, is a preview. This is a draft, and stakeholder input is welcome. This is a critical piece of the puzzle that we want everyone to be able to give us insight to make this into a better tool. This has been developed through consultations with organizations and experts, both in the global north and the global south. And one person who has been instrumental in refining the nuances is Ken Webster, whose work is really at the forefront of the circular economy. So this is part of a bigger toolbox that is being developed for the Circular Economy Coalition, which is soon to be launched and announced. It is an international multi-stakeholder coalition of value-aligned individuals and organizations collectively advancing the circular economy through shared tools and resources. And we are connecting research and academia, the third sector and the private sector, as well as the public sector and financial sector. So what this comes down to, I'm always amazed at the details of one sentence. Circularity for all is about resources being maintained and kept in use at their highest societal value at all times. This includes living, biological, technical, and financial resources. When we talk about maintained and kept in use, this is about the smallest loops. We have to prioritize those loops before we start looking at recycling. We've all seen the R's, the levels, and those smallest loops are critical. When we talk about societal value, we're talking about societal value versus commercial value. And of course, this is following up on traditional circular economic thinking with biological and technical cycles, which we've all seen with the Ellen MacArthur butterfly diagram. But we are also taking into account living resources. When this was first developed, it originally said human resources, but we clearly see from a biodiversity standpoint, we need to look at flora, fauna, and fungi, as well as all of the human resources, because our economy is not just about the human resources that are active in the workforce, but also those outside of the workforce. And from a social standpoint, this is also going to be discussed today. But one critical value flow that is not often accounted for properly is the financial resources. And today, when we're talking about procurement, this is one key lever to be able to accelerate change. As Mr. Schmidt mentioned, we're also talking about how can we adjust private procurement? How do we ensure that our financial resources are maintained and kept in use at their highest societal value? And so this is a building block template where we look right now at the linear effects, where we see rent extraction, focus on GDP, we see social and economic inequality, environmental degradation, and biodiversity loss. Biodiversity is one of the core themes that's going to be discussed in this year's ECESP conference coming up earlier, I guess it's the end of February. And so what we need to do is say, how can we use policies and economic incentives to strategically transform our economy? We need new metrics. We need indicators. These will also be discussed. And they need to support well-being and a just transition for all within the circular economy and within the planetary boundaries. And we need to make sure that we bridge the global north and the global south. But the question comes up about what is best practice? How to ensure that we don't leave emerging economies behind in this process. Once we get to this top level, and you may notice this looks like a traffic light, we've gone from the red where we have to stop, we're in this amber zone where we have to be careful. We need to get to this green where we just say go. And this can only be achieved once we look at bridging the cultural and linguistic barriers. And this is going to be done through shared norms and values, and this will allow us to revitalize our economy. And this is where the resources will be maintained and kept in use according to their highest societal value versus their highest commercial value. How do we do that? How do we bridge these cultural and linguistic barriers? There's some fantastic work being done on pattern language, on standards, ontologies, and multilingual tools to be able to bridge the linguistic issues. But we also have to look at those shared norms and values. And this, I think, is interesting because not only do we have to look at the norms and values that we all agree upon, connecting the global north and south, the haves and the have-nots, but we also need to look at the local and regional levels. Each and every person in this conference today can think about their own community and think that we have haves and have-nots in each and every community. How do we develop shared norms and values so we as a society move forward together? And so together, this becomes a hierarchy that allows us to go from status quo to transitioning the economy to socially just and circular economic regions. And revitalization, it's about imbuing new life into all of the resources that we do have. And so this is a blank canvas that can be used for any facet of the circular economy. Right now, it's very fragmented, the circular economy. I often speak about that, how the circular economy is like a diamond with many facets. But if we work together, it can be our strongest resource. So whether you're working on biomaterials, on procurement, such as today, on any aspect of the circular economy, we hope to provide this as a tool to establish good, better, best. And this blank canvas, once we then take a look at it from a procurement standpoint, we start to see, and I would very much like to talk afterwards, anyone who has input to help refine this concept, this is just a draft. We see that we have this status quo. We see the piloting of products as a service models. We have limited understanding of the impacts, and we have too few large-scale projects. We've seen this transition, these policies and economic incentives to enable us to move towards green and then circular procurement. And we've seen financial support for procurement buyers and groups and pilot projects. We see capacity building for procuring organizations and suppliers, and an improvement of the procurement process. But if we really want to look at how do we revitalize our economies, we need to also look at social and circular procurement. And in order to do that, and that is not an easy task, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panelists today, how do we scale and replicate and network the best practice methodologies to ensure an inclusive workforce, which will develop dynamic local and regional ecosystems with transparency in the value chains that support fundamental human rights and decent working conditions. And so this is one of the tools as part of the upcoming Circular Economy Coalition. I'm going to be participating in the spatial chat afterwards, and I would welcome any conversations. If you're unable to and you'd like to be able to reach me, you can contact me at Circular Regions or connection to the Circular Economy Coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for your presentation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them in the chat. Maybe we can address them during, right after the presentation, and otherwise during the panel discussion. I see no questions so far, so we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Claire Downey. Claire is the Director of Policy and Research at Rediscovery Center, the National Center for Circular Economy. In this role, she is responsible for leading policy and research activity at the center and operations to support the development of the circular economy within Ireland and internationally. She is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management and a board member with the Green Foundation Ireland. Claire, could you please share your screen and presentation with us and tell us more about the local impact of social and circular procurement?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and it's fantastic to be part of this discussion and share some of the procurement examples that we've come across. So apologies for the deaf background. I'm dialing in from Australia, but I do work at the Rediscovery Centre, which is based in Dublin in Ireland. And our vision as a centre is a society that's fair, inclusive and thrives within natural resource limits. And I wanted to start with that because I think it illustrates and reflects the values of the just transition. As Cynthia said, what we want to see is the whole society benefit from the social, environmental and economic impacts of the circular economy. And as a centre, how we try to achieve this is by leading the transition in Ireland to a circular economy as the national centre, but we also operate as a social enterprise. And by social enterprise, what we mean is that we reinvest any profits made through our traded services and goods into our social mission, which is what you see here. And we also employ and provide training opportunities to local people who otherwise have difficulty in accessing the labour market. And I will be coming back to this type of social impact in my presentation. The reason for the focus on procurement has already been, I suppose, introduced very well by the previous two speakers, but I think what's really important and what we've heard already is that the public authorities in particular, public procurement, have very significant purchasing power. The Circular Economy Action Plan found that the total purchasing power is around 14% of European GDP. And this makes it a really powerful tool for investing in the right outcomes, in our social and environmental outcomes. Because every time we make a purchasing decision, whether it be public or private, we are effectively voting for the type of products or the types of services that we think should be, that we should be seeing more of. And what we know as well is that around 80%, again from the Circular Economy Action Plan, around 80% of a product's environmental impacts are determined right at the design phase, as well as in many ways the social impact. And that means that every purchasing decision that we make really influences the downstream environmental impacts and social impacts as well. We've been talking about going from local to global. I will be talking very much about some local examples, but I wanted to show this diagram to kind of illustrate where we see the different environmental impacts and social impacts in a very broad sense, because of course, individual products can be very different. And we're talking about a huge area of built environment and consumer goods and so on. But I suppose generally what we tend to see is the raw material extraction, design and manufacturing tends to be highly globalized with these globalized supply chains. And so really understanding, measuring and influencing the environmental and social impact of making new products can be much harder to grasp. Whereas as we move around the circular economy diagram from raw material extraction right around to distribution, consumption, use, reuse, and then repair, what we start to see is these actions and these impacts start to become much more localized. And so the procurement examples that I wanted to share that illustrate how we can influence the local impact on both social and environmental are related to this reuse and repair space. We have these kind of local recirculation loops, essentially, and that's where we have a lot more local control over these social and environmental impacts. And there are so many examples to choose from, and earlier Virla mentioned the excellent ProCirc project, and I would really urge you to go onto the website and look at all the amazing procurement projects that have taken place through that Interreg program. But I will share some examples that I'm most familiar with from Ireland and Scotland. And the first example the Rediscovery Centre participated in was a furniture procurement project. The procurement agency is National Waste Collection Permitting Office, which is based in Central Ireland. And it was a small scale project. This was the first of its kind in Ireland, and it did win a procurement award, and that's why I particularly wanted to share it. And what the agency wanted to do was furnish their office space. They were moving into with 100% reused and upcycled furniture. And that, as you can see here, was actually specified in the request for quotation because it was a small scale project. But importantly, what this request for quotation also facilitated was a consortium approach. And that meant that they were open to having more than one supplier involved in providing this service. And that was extremely important because many social enterprises operate at very small scale, and even a tender to the value of €25,000 worth of goods would be quite difficult for many, certainly in Ireland, to be able to meet. And so being able to come together and facilitate a consortium approach really opened the door to social enterprises becoming involved in a project like this. The project was led by the Reuse Network Community Resources Network, which is the Irish member of the Reuse Network Europe. And in that way, it was able to bring together its social enterprise members in the reuse and repair space. Some of the impacts from this project were around €20,000, so just shy of the total was spent on social enterprise, which in turn supported them in providing new opportunities, new skills for people who are distant from the labour market in preparing and providing furniture and upcycling it. Environmental impacts, around 97 items of secondhand furniture were used to furnish the office space, so 97 new items were avoided, and that avoided overall 2.6 tonnes of carbon. And there were very important economic impacts too. So the overall cost to the tenderer, to the National Waste Collection Permit Officer, was similar to purchasing all new products, but because they were happy to meet that tender value, we're able to provide much higher quality furniture, some really bespoke, really outstanding pieces out of the project. So otherwise the cost would have been lower than new. And in addition, because through this project, the social enterprise is working to maximize reuse, we're also able to take some furniture that businesses were trying to get rid of and do them up and bring them into this office. And in that way, the businesses themselves were able to avoid the cost of disposal. So multiple economic benefits from that. The second example comes from Scotland. This is an outstanding project. And here we have a framework contract. So the government, on behalf of local authorities, established a framework contract for the provision of furniture to housing associations. And the condition of being able to take part in the framework was that you must be able to show community benefit and report on community benefit. And only one consortium is involved in this framework, and that's the Reuse Consortium through Circular Community Scotland. So what they purchase through the consortium is furniture for social housing, and there are multiple social enterprises involved who can supply that furniture. It's usually on a one-to-one call-down basis, so it's an annual rolling arrangement. And all of the reuse social enterprises involved in that framework also operate to Revolve standards, so to a very high standard that provides assurance, quality assurance to the local authorities, the procurement agents, that the furniture and the organisation themselves operating to a very high standard. There are some excellent annual reports on this project if you're interested in finding out more on the community, Circular Community Scotland website. But the impact just in the last year, that was in the most recent report, in terms of social impacts, it has sustained 19 local jobs. Again, people often who otherwise would find it difficult to find employment provided these jobs and training opportunities. And over £500,000 has been spent on social enterprises and supporting their social mission in procuring furniture. Environmental impact, very significant, 244 tonnes of furniture in 1 year and 648 tonnes of CO2 avoided because that furniture is not being purchased new, it's being purchased secondhand. And then finally, the economic impact, well, secondhand furniture costs between 20 and 60% less than new furniture, so the local authorities are benefiting from these savings of around £270,000. The third and final example I wanted to share with you relates to the procurement of a service as opposed to a good. So of course we can do both sides of the procurement. And here we have a really exceptional project again and first of its kind in Ireland, the Irish Prison Service, which approached various mattress recycling social enterprises in Ireland to look for a service to remove used mattresses from the prisons. There were 12 prisons involved, and overall, the most important part of this project, I suppose, is that the criteria was very clear that any organisation awarded this contract would have to employ former offenders. So there's a very strong social clause built into the recycling service that former offenders must be employed up to 20% of the total workforce, in addition to recycling or repurposing discarded mattresses. This project also went in for an award with the European Sustainable Procurement of the Year Awards, and came in as runner-up. The overall impact, this is only recently concluded, so we don't have all the figures involved, but former offenders, as you saw, were engaged. 2 social enterprises were involved to recycle mattresses, and they obviously employed 20% of their workforce as former offenders. Around 1,200 mattresses were diverted, and up to 80% of those was recycled. And again, here we have slightly different types of economic impacts, where the cost of detaining ex-offenders, because through employing former offenders, there's a reduced risk of reoffending. So we have a saving to the exchequer related to reoffence and the reduced cost of that. And of course, providing employment for people increases the tax base. So just a slightly different take on the economic impact. In summary, very much reflecting the vision I shared earlier from the Rediscovery Centre here, we're really looking for and trying to encourage and would love to see more of this type of procurement that is fair, is inclusive, specifies or opens and supports social enterprises and similar organisations to participate in the procurement, and also supports circular economy goals. So please do ask any questions. I look forward to the panel discussion, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Claire, all the way from Australia, for your presentation and sharing these interesting cases. I am taking a look at the chat right now because some similar cases were sent in, but also a question from Mariska. I don't know if Mariska wants to turn on her microphone to ask the question herself.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, and my question was about, you calculate the avoided carbon emission, and I'm currently also working on that. And I was wondering which factors you use. Do you use like the A1 till A3 from the LCA method as prevention, or yeah, which factors do you include in this calculation?
Yeah, so it is a rough calculation, and you do have to make a lot of assumptions that the procurement agent wasn't otherwise, going to buy other secondhand furniture, so the displacement question. But for the actual calculation itself, we use a tool that's shared by the Reuse Network Europe and was developed by ERES, which is a Spanish reuse network, and I'll share a link to that in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Also, thank you, Mervyn and Tony, for sending the extra information in the chat. Our next speaker, we are also very pleased to have our next speaker with us, Sarango Ukna. Sarango is a project manager at the Ergonom Vétérinaires Sans Frontières, INGO, Mongolia, to build a sustainable cashmere value chain and support sustainable cashmere export and sales from Mongolia. Sarango is a textile engineer with a doctor's degree in engineering science from the Université de Haute-Alsace, with 15 years of experience in wool and cashmere sector, including executive position in major cashmere producers. Sarango, could you enlighten us with the work you've been doing in Mongolia?
Good morning. Good morning for the participant, and for me it's good afternoon, but good morning. And first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizer, giving me opportunity to share our experience and experience in for sustainable development. And today I will introduce briefly, shortly, what is the STEP Ecolab project and how we achieved some results during these 4 years project implementation. And then I think that Powell will continue to discuss more in detail some other things. Well, STEP Ecolab, or Sustainable Textile Production and Eco-labeling in Mongolia. This is the project funded by European Union. It's the very first project for Mongolian textile sector. And the objective of this project is contribute to the establishment of the sustainable textile consumption and production in Mongolia. So next slide. So just I would like to highlight that we are pastoralist nomadic people with and our main driving sector is cashmere and wool raw animal fiber production, agricultural sector after mining, of course. And I would like to emphasize also we are second largest producer of cashmere worldwide, and the 90% of income of our herders is coming from the sales of cashmere. Next slide. So, of course, it's very important to approach these herders because the value chain of cashmere must be sustainable, upstream and downstream of value chain. So I would like, from now, I would like to present the main achievement of our project. So first of all, it was very important to consolidate the knowledge and capacity of Mongolian herders for the sustainable livestock herding practices. So ECESP, Agronomes Vétérinaires Sans Frontières, and our project partner, National Federation of Pasture User Groups, have collected more than 10 years experience in the upstream of the value chain to develop sustainable pasture land management. Why? Because the pasture land damage, degradation, and desertification is a crucial challenge for Mongolia because our animal livestock is around 70 million, and this is almost 3 times of carrying capacity of actual pasture. And because of the increased demand of cashmere, the Mongolian herders continues to increase the number of goats. And because of the very particular climate, very harsh winter, the goat cannot be grown alone. The sheep is very necessary. Sheep must be with the goats because the sheep can be kind of the warming animal for the goat. So the practice of Mongolians in high mountain is always growing sheep and goats together to survive very harsh winter, cold season. So that's why when the number of goats is increasing, the number of sheep is increasing also automatically. And because of that, now we have 3 times more carrying capacity than our pasture land, and we are facing pasture desertification. So it is very important to to raise awareness of herders and to explain them why is this climate change is coming, how we are influencing to the pasture land degradation by increasing our goat number, how they could diversify their income, and how they could protect the pasture land and to practice the sustainable pasture land. So we during these 4 years we already organized 17 training session for the Mongolian herders, and thanks to our efforts. Next slide. Thanks to our efforts, you can see that the quantity of sustainable raw material increased, and one of the demand requirement to our herder is to increase productivity of goat, not the quantity, to prefer the quality than quantity, and to decrease the animal number, and to increase high quality fiber. And thanks to our effort, the sales of responsible, sustainable, traceable raw materials was increased 2 times during these 4 years. Next slide. Maybe some of the, yeah, I have to wait. Yeah, okay. So for the international buyer, for the European consumer, it's very important to trust the origin of material, raw material. So our project team and our implementing partner, National Federation of Pasture User Group, developed kind of traceability system based on blockchain technology. So this is the garments or the wool balls, wool packages can be delivered with QR code, and using your smartphone, you will read this QR code, and then you will have complete information about this cashmere or this product. And in this system, you can see if the herders are sustainable, practicing sustainable livestock management, and you can have photo of families and etc. So this is very interesting system, and that will differentiate Mongolian sustainable raw fiber from the normal raw fiber, and also that will also trace, identify Mongolian cashmere from the cashmere coming from Inner Mongolia, because of Inner Mongolia is Chinese region, and European consumer, they don't understand these two Mongolia, and they're always confused. So it's really an important traceability system to trace the origin of our fiber. Next slide. So then, of course, almost 90% of Stepecola project dedicated for the benefit of the Mongolian textile factories, local factories. So the situation was our textile, sustainable development or sustainability is was well known in Mongolia, but it was the very first project trying to develop sustainable practices in textile sector, in the wool and cashmere processing sector in Mongolia. So the knowledge of our textile industries was almost zero, I could say. So we started with the training, and we started with the handbook because you know, the most of Mongolian engineers, they are very they don't understand in French and English, and we developed this handbook of sustainable wool and cashmere production. First time, it's very first book in Mongolian about the sustainable production, and this book is very well adapted to the particular technology of Kashmir, and 200 copies was printed and distributed to the Mongolian customer. And it is a kind of table book for the Mongolian engineers who's implementing sustainable practices in their production line. And then we are doing also a lot of training with the for the Mongolian textile industries. Even the project is ended. I'm working at the ECESP when our textile factory asked me to present some training for their engineers. I organized this training session to them. So we will continue this training. And also our project partner, Mongolian Wool and Kashmir Association, they continue also the training of sustainability for the textile industries. So we made also a baseline study about on the environmental and social risk of local factories, just to know where we are. And when we just choose the criteria, similar criteria than step by Oikotex, made in green by Oikotex and GUTS. And we evaluating actually our textile industries and project evaluating water consumption, energy consumption, and wastewater discharge every year. And this is according to we are evaluating this quantity, unit quantity, according to the international methodology. And this gave a big progress, because by measuring these consumption industries, they are able to decide to change their technology to save water, to save energy, and to reduce wastewater discharge. Next slide, please. So here I would like to highlight the support of Mongolian government. Because Kashmir is the very strategic sector for Mongolians, because unique fiber, and Mongolian government supported very well during these 4 years our activity. And Mongolia now is adopting 2 different standards of sustainability in upstream and downstream of the value chain of animal fiber. This is the very first sustainability standard for in Mongolia, and we are leading all processing sector. Textile sector of Mongolia is leading all other processing sector. It's the very first sustainability standard, and this standard, especially this is sustainable textile production national standard, is issued from the voluntary code of practice for sustainable production, and this voluntary code of practice was developed in the collaboration of with CSCP. So this is national requirement, and of course the company who would like to get internationally recognized standard like Global Organic Textile standard, they could apply to this standard, but first of all they need to comply to this standard. And I would like just to I wouldn't talk much about the responsible herder, because it's upstream of it concerns herders and herder cooperatives. I would like to precise Mongolian Sustainable Textile Production National Standard. And as you can see, there is a two section in these standards, eco-packaging and waste management. And when this is very similar, it's aligned with this circular talk, because in this requirement of this eco-packaging in this standard is we included that all the packaging must be recycled. And in the waste management, the same thing, we are requiring to textile industries to have very good waste management, try to use kind of recycled plastic bottles, and or reuse the waste coming from the spinning, knitting, and weaving to produce new recycled products. And in that, with this way, try to minimize the use of the new cashmere and try to increase the raw material source utilization. Next slide, please. So we are working with the 18 local factories, and these 18 local factories is producing almost 90% of end products and 62% of the haired material, animal fibers. So these 18 factories, they already have enough knowledge about the circular economy. Of course, we are not big producer of chemical fibers. We are not producer of the plastic packages, but we are user of these plastic packages and plastic bottles. So the concept of circular economy is already introduced to our local factories, and they know and they know how to minimize as much as possible the use of plastic packaging and the use of plastic bottles. So I would like to highlight several examples. For example, Gobi is one of the biggest company leading Kashmir sector, and Gobi is now using using only water bottle, water tank, and they are not buying water coming from water with the plastic packaging. So the four other textile companies is introducing a new line of recycled cashmere. So they are starting to change their behavior against plastic packaging and plastic and against the waste. So I think that please indicate me if the time is over. Maybe next slides I will shorten my presentation. So it is also very important to have some goals. So our project developed roadmap for the sustainable development of Kashmir sector in Mongolia, and we tried to fix measurable objective within this roadmap. And as you can see in this slide, we are dividing this the development in 3 phases, and we fixed three different objectives, and for this 3 period. So please, next slide. And this is the objective of for the raw materials production. So it's not the important thing is here we are trying to plan how we can rehabilitate this damaged pasture land. This is important numbers. Maybe next slide. And also we are very clear measurable targets for energy efficiency, for water consumption, for recycling, reusing wastewater coming from the scouring plants of wool. And we are planning also some reduction in use of chemicals and the reduction on the waste. And well, here I would like just to highlight some achievements in the green financing in Mongolia, because all these activities to implement sustainable practices in production line, of course, we need some financing, and green financing could be a very good economic leverage to implement sustainable practices in Mongolian textile in local industries. So first of all, we developed green taxonomy, and it was approved by Ministry of Finance and Mongol banks in 2019. And in this green taxonomy, the sustainable textile production and sustainable livestock production is mentioned. And then we produced together with Mongolian Banking Association and with Mongolian Sustainable Financing Association, we developed textile sector guideline to assess environmental and social risks, and this guideline is very useful for the banking officers when they evaluate the risk, environmental and social risk of local industries. And then we developed green credit criteria specific for textile sector, and this green credit criteria, in this green credit criteria, we highlighted all the green technology with green labels. So then we participate successfully to Premier Vision in July of last year, and we introduced our achievement for the visitors. And what is the further action? Of course, we need to scale up sustainable raw material sourcing, sustainable cashmere sourcing, because, for instance, the production of sustainable cashmere and sustainable animal fiber is not matching with the demand. And of course, we need to strengthen our achievement in textile sector. And also very important is to identify what is the circularity potential and implement this this opportunity in the textile sector. For that, I think that we really need to start with studies to use all these raw material waste and what kind of new products we could do. So this is training, this is a study, innovation, and research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights, Sarango. Our next and final speaker is Jenny Alström. Jenny is working at the Norwegian Agency for Public and Financial Management, DFØ, as a senior advisor in the field of human rights and public procurement. She is interested in finding solutions to improve and simplify the control that goods purchased with public funds are produced under legal and safe working conditions, where human rights and the ILO core conventions are respected. Jenny, could you please share your screen and presentation with us?
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I will share my presentation here. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk a little bit about how in Norway we work with public procurement and human rights to ensure good working conditions in global supply chains. My name is Jenny Alström. I'm a senior advisor at the Norwegian Agency for Public and Financial Management, working in the division for public procurement in the section for sustainability and innovation. And there, together with 10 colleagues, we are creating templates, tools. We host seminars, for instance, to help public buyers to increase sustainable and innovative public procurement in Norway. And DFÖ, it's the shortening of the agency in Norwegian. The main goal is to ensure good value for money for public procurement. And in this concept of good value, we have a triple bottom line, which is economy, environment, and social aspects should be taken into consideration. And if you see that public procurement, as you all know, is a very big part of GDP in most countries, 16% in Norway, the public buyers has a great leverage to increase the focus of the suppliers on working conditions and thereby drive them towards increasing the control audits, etc. And in the end, the goal is to create a better system for how supply chains are organized. Yeah, as I said, the aim is efficient and sustainable procurement. And we are also supposed to be a driving force and competence center for national and international cooperation on public procurement. And here is some of our offers that we have to Norwegian public procurers. We have online guidance. We create criteria, selection criteria and award criteria, for instance, to help procurers to gain the most sustainable products. We are gathering data and performance monitoring from how contracts are managed in relation to sustainability. We have networks and seminars. We have a very popular help desk, which is new from last year, where procurers can call us to our sustainability division and ask concrete questions about procurement and how to use criteria and follow up. We have courses and we have certification schemes on sustainability. And we have a high risk list, which is used not only by the public sector, but also by private sector, which we have mapped risks levels in the whole supply chain from raw material to finished goods. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this high risk list afterwards. So what I want to shed light on is how the state as a regulator of responsible business conduct is also a responsible customer, which means it has great leverage towards improving working conditions on a global basis. And this was first stated in 2011 in the UN Guiding Principles, Article 6, that states should promote respect for human rights by business enterprises, which they conduct commercial transactions with. And from there, we have the Public Procurement Act revised in 2017, where the wording changed from contract authorities can promote respect for fundamental rights, human rights, to shall, which is then a binding obligation that in all contracts over threshold value, which is 1.3 Norwegian million crowns, you should have routines and processes in order to respect human rights in the supply chain of the supplier. And then I will compare this Public Procurement Act with the new Norwegian Transparency Act from last year, which also is binding that business should promote respect for human rights and decent working conditions. And they should also have access to information and publicly show how they are working with responsible supply chain management. And if we first have a look at how Norwegian public procurers are encouraged to work with sustainable procurement. We have, as I mentioned before, a high-risk list, which we encourage the procurers to use in order to have a tool to see in the supply chain where the highest risks are, from the raw material to finished goods. And then we see that it's a lot of public procurers now increasingly wanting to use qualification and award criteria to promote and help the development of sustainable public procurement by awarding suppliers who had spent a lot of money and resources on internal buildup of routines and processes that then historically have not been awarded, and high-risk contracts maybe have been won by suppliers that are cutting prices, but then don't know how their supply chain look like. So this has been a big change now that in Norwegian public procurement, we also award suppliers with good supply chain management. And this is a bit hard sometimes for the procurers to understand the information. And then we say that they should ask for binary information where they can say yes or no, they're going to get a point or not as an award. And then, for instance, we recommend that they get points for product units which are certified. And then we say that they should use contract clauses for safeguarding basic human rights, and they should follow up these contracts. And this is a high-risk list which we update every year, and we analyze the risk of human rights breaches. And you see these type of products which we also know have a big risk of human rights breaches in the supply chain, where they can read more about it. We have reports on conflict minerals, for example, and textile is a commonly purchased product where we also have a lot of attention on this report. And here is just an example of how these contract performance clauses can look like. It requests the suppliers to adhere to the ILO co-conventions, the UN Convention of the Child, and national legislation on workers' rights in the country of production. And these are built on the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct, which I'm going to see later how this base as a method is very useful for policy coherence, since the Transparency Act also is based on the OECD guidance. And how to follow up a contract. We say that suppliers first should fill in the self-assessment scheme, which is an example showing there of the first step in the OECD framework for responsible business conduct. And then when doing the revision of how the suppliers has answered, we recommend, if there are lacking answers, that they have a meeting with the supplier or ask to send additional information. And then if it's still lacking information, they should get the corrective action plan. If it's still indicating high risk of human rights violation, we recommend on-site audits and there from another correction plan. And here we have examples of how actually public procurers can improve the working conditions of production units. For example, 2 years ago, the health sector procurement saw that there was high risk for forced labor in factories in Malaysia. And when they went on inspections, they noticed that the suppliers had their passports confiscated. And they immediately contacted the suppliers and had corrective action plans that in 1 week workers had their passports back. So this is an example of how actually the public procurement demanding responsible supply management can factors have an effect on the ground. As a last resort, if the suppliers are not cooperating or if they are not correcting breaches, the contracts can be terminated. But this is the very last resort, and it has actually never occurred in Norway, since the view or perception is that it should be a cooperation between the public authorities and the suppliers in order to improve working conditions and not terminate contracts, which will be bad for the workers. And then coming to the new Transparency Act in Norway, which is demanding business to account for responsible supply chain management through transparency, and also they are supposed to answer questions from the public on how they respect fundamental human rights and decent working conditions in supply chain. It came into force last year, and now there is a 1 year of preparation for public reporting. But as of this year, or last year as well, they are to answer questions from the public on, for example, specific products, how they have been produced and how the supply chain looks like. And it will be interesting with the public reporting from June 2013 this year, 23, because it's going to be a great help for the public suppliers when they see that the contracts are adhered to, because then they can request the link to the Transparency Act reports, which will simplify their work on self-assessment questionnaires, etc. So summary is the companies shall report on human rights due diligence. They have to answer questions from the public and public suppliers, and they should also publish then from 1st of June this year an account of the due diligence assessments on their website. And as I said, the Transparency Act, the idea is to promote human rights in supply chains. And also an important factor is that this information on how the companies are doing this should be transparent and put on the websites. And this is to hold the companies accountable, and it's also important that the board of the companies and the top management have signed the ethical contract conditions. So it will be a top level management approach on this. And the Act applies to larger enterprises that are resident in Norway and larger enterprises that offer goods and services in Norway and are liable to tax to Norway. And it's about 9,000 companies in Norway which are included. The threshold is quite small, low. It's over 50 people working in companies that are supposed to report, and they have threshold for the economic factors as well, which is quite low. It's under the EU definition of small and medium-sized businesses. And this, of course, it might be complicated for smaller companies, but the OECD contact point in Norway has a lot of information and give courses also. Yeah, and then I'm going to hurry up a little bit because I see time is running out. You probably all have heard about the OECD framework for responsible business conduct, which is very good that both these acts are based on the same methodology, which is simplifying and making it easier for companies to adhere to and know what to report. And I was talking about the top level management was really important. And then they're supposed to identify risk factors, and they should have the systems and routines on how to control human rights in the supply chain. For example, it's very important to have pre-assessment of suppliers, that you know that the working conditions are good before starting production. And also it's important to communicate the results of audits. And finally, if there is breaches of human rights, they should take part in remediation of victims. And finally, looking at the synergies between the Public Procurement Act and the Transparency Act, both are based on respecting human rights in the supply chain. And they are also based on the OECD framework, as I said, for responsible business practice. And it is, for the Transparency Act, compulsory to report online, which is a win-win opportunity for the public sector, since they then can retract information very easy. And it's very easy as well for the public procurers wanting to go into specific sample products, that they can request information, and they should have it within 3 weeks. Yeah, thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Now we can move to the final part of today's circular talk, our panel discussion, which leaves me to introduce to you our moderator, Cristina Fedato. Cristina is Head of Sustainable Infrastructure, Products and Services at the CSCP, a German think tank working internationally in the field of sustainable consumption and production. Cristina represents the CSCP in the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform Leadership Group for cities and regions, circular procurement and textiles. Today, Cristina will kindly moderate our panel discussion. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Thanks to our speakers that are now invited to join us to this panel. I also invite Pavel Zilka to join us. That was not a speaker now, but that was also involved in the State Ecolab project in Mongolia, together with Sarango, representing the CSCP, that was a partner from AVSF during this journey, and can also be part of the discussion now. We got up front some questions from the attendees, and we have also selected some of them. And before going to the questions, I would like to say that some of the questions that came to us are about measuring circularity and how to define product circularity. And we would like to say to you that we had in May last year another circular talk specifically about this topic, and we will put in the chat to you the link to the recorded video where we addressed exactly this topic, and today we will then give preference to the questions and to the discussion that address the topic of this circular talk. But of course, through the LinkedIn group and other channels, we can later on discuss further the measuring that will always be a challenge and an interesting topic. So today, back to the topic we are in. I will start with a question addressed first to Cynthia, but also to all speakers. That would be that many are still trying to incorporate the criteria for green procurement and circular procurement. And what are some examples of criteria for social procurement, and how do we support both local and global perspectives?
Thank you. We're seeing the transition and the evolution of criteria across many types of procurement, and many of them are very overlapping. We see with green criteria, we have energy and water efficiency, renewable energy, environmental management, carbon footprint, and assessments like LCAs. The circular criteria, also covering some of those, includes design for circularity, material and resource efficiency, end-of-life management, incorporating EPR and the like. But when it comes to the social criteria, we're seeing fair labor standards. This can include compliance with laws and regulations as discussed by previous speakers, looking at worker rights and minimum wage laws and safety standards. We also see a strong move now towards support of disadvantaged groups. This can include criteria related to the employment of disadvantaged individuals, such as veterans. We'll be seeing a big move towards that, given what's happening in Europe right now. Those recovering from addiction, former offenders, people with disabilities, both mental and physical, but also individuals from low income and marginalized communities. We're also seeing a direction towards local economic development. This can include criteria related to supporting local suppliers, small to medium-sized enterprises, and there are some discussions in the chat about SMEs, and that's interesting. We can talk about that at Spatial Chat. But also community engagement related to suppliers' engagement with local communities through community outreach programs, partnerships with local organizations. But what's critical is identifying the best practice solutions using standard case study data. That's core to much of the work that I do myself. So how do we identify the criteria, the impact measurement, and at the very least, start supporting the process to understand the impact with new metrics? So when it comes to the local and global perspective, as regions across Europe and other developed countries become increasingly circular, we have to ensure that we're not only creating policies and economic incentives that support local, resilient, regenerative economies, we have to ensure that the policies don't cut off the markets from developing emergent economies. And the optimized use of financial resources, which I mentioned earlier in the hierarchy, needs to be completely reconsidered. And Ken Webster's work on universal basic dividend, which he outlined in the recent Earth for All book, is a worthwhile read. I highly recommend it. Thanks.
You're still muted, Christine.
You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Cynthia. Any other comment from the other speakers? Otherwise, I go to the next question that was sent up front by Anne Snick from the Club of Rome. I don't see her online. If I'm not mistaken, she is not there. Then I will read the question to all of you. She says she's especially interested in financial criteria for circularity, for instance, where public procurement goes towards mission-driven companies or benefit corporations, steward ownership, etc., reinvesting their profits transparently into the societal goal of a just and regenerative economy. Is circular finance to be included as a parameter in public procurement? Who would like to comment and address this question? Cynthia, go ahead.
That's a really, really important topic. And if anyone would like to join in Spatial Chat to talk about that, because I think we're seeing a move towards social enterprise, public benefit corps, and there's a really interesting direction towards the fourth sector. How do we identify that? But different countries have different legal entities. So I'll gladly take that conversation in Spatial Chat afterwards and welcome the conversation.
Thank you. So you are all invited to discuss this with Cynthia afterwards. Then Jenny is back. Good. I will then move to a question that was brought by Mervyn, and Mervyn Jones, I have seen online and also in the chat. And I would kindly ask you, Mervyn, to bring your question and unmute yourself. Yes.
Hi, Christina. Hi, everybody.
Hi. And you can also turn your camera on if you want.
I don't think I want to because I'm highly embarrassed. I haven't got access to the question. So if you've got the question, I wrote it yesterday.
Do you want me to read the question?
Please. Thank you.
Yes. How do procurers develop a proportional approach to social and circular criteria in tenders so that they don't end up competing? This is what I got from you.
Yes, thank you very much.
You can probably elaborate a bit more if you want.
Yes, from my perspective, in terms of working with public sector procurement, both in the United Kingdom, but also much more widely in Europe, increasingly I'm coming across not practices, but I'm coming across experiences and examples where there's almost a competition between social value and circular criteria being inserted, and it comes down to the whole concept about proportionality and balance within tenders, and depending on obviously on the value of the tender and the subject matter. So I just wanted to know if the panel had experience of that, and how to create an environment around sustainable public procurement that doesn't then start to potentially put conflict between the different pillars of sustainability.
Thanks, Mervyn. Who would like to answer or comment? Claire?
I can
go ahead.
Have a quick go at this one. I haven't seen this conflict emerge yet in Ireland, which is where I would know procurement better. But we've certainly seen a lot more circular procurement, circular criteria than social in Ireland so far, but I think it's slightly different in different regions. But one thing that we found from the furniture project, the first project that I mentioned, is that there are ways that we can make it more accessible to smaller organizations. And again, this may be different in different regions, but certainly in Ireland, a lot of our social enterprises tend to be smaller, or a lot of more local small SMEs tend to be more embedded within their communities. And so there are ways to create, to break out procurement projects into smaller lots, to facilitate consortiums, to design the tender itself that allows for these different entrants, these different participants to engage in the project, all with a kind of underlying circular criteria, if that makes sense. So it's kind of facilitating different types of participants, including social enterprises and SMEs, in circular tenders. But again, I don't know if that's relevant to other regions.
Anyone else on examples? Or the possibilities? Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Mervyn. And then we can move to a next question. That would be probably to Claire and possibly Cynthia. That is, what are the biggest challenges in bringing the social economy and circular economy together for the benefits of people, job creation, and society?
Cynthia, do you want to go first, or?
It's easy. I can go ahead if you'd like. I guess when it comes to the challenges, we see that sort of cities, regions, and nations are all hopping on board the circular economy train. The levels are unprecedented. I believe it was that Chatham House at the World Circular Economy Forum had an event where they were saying that they'd mapped about 50 countries that have developed roadmaps and strategies. And I believe the challenge is to provide them with a holistic understanding of the circular economy. one that supports the social dimensions, including social equity up to the global level, social impacts down to the local level, and a shift towards social enterprise, and as I was mentioning earlier, this new fourth sector in development as new models for economic activity. Communicating this concept through a holistic understanding is one of the greatest challenges. Otherwise, quite honestly, we'll simply be stuck in a world that thinks that recycling and continuing with extractive business models is the answer. And this is a core part of the mission for the Circular Economy Coalition going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Cynthia. Claire?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that to specifically consider the specific challenges facing procurement bodies or procurers. And I'm sure many in the audience can add to this list, but some observations from the different projects we've seen in terms of procuring for social and circular outcomes. Obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty around ensuring legal compliance when you include certain criteria. So the more guidance from government and the more case studies we can see in this area that include both social and circular, either criteria or awards, would really help. So that is, we're definitely seeing more and more examples of that. I think the second thing is that, as I mentioned, and again, it may be regional specific, but the scale of suppliers in this area that combine both circular and social outcome tend to be quite small, or there tend to be limited number of suppliers in this space. So understanding the market and knowing the market and I suppose sounding out the market is really important. And one thing that our network for reuse and repair in Ireland has done is create a virtual trade fair to try and connect those suppliers of circular and social goods and services with potential buyers, just to show the scope and what is already available to the market. And I think that is a really important step for kind of getting some pilot examples and smaller projects going. And then thirdly, as Cynthia said, I think the awareness of particularly the importance of social enterprise is still not high. I think we're seeing a lot more circular than social procurement. And that really underpins, again, the importance of these bi-social campaigns, awareness around the value and impact of social activity. So I think it's those three things really would help kind of overcome some of these challenges.
Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, I think those were excellent points that you made, Claire. And I actually wanted to point out an example of an innovative procurement solution here in Norway. And maybe, Annie, you could give some more insight into that. It's a concept called Start Off, where instead of identifying this is the solution, how do you check all the boxes? You come up with it's a challenge. How are we going to do this? And to see more challenges that include the social aspects. Can you provide a solution that will create inclusive jobs in the process of this product or service offering? And I think this is about how do we take innovative ways of doing this and allowing, just the emergence of new ideas. I think that that's really key. Everything is so structured. And of course, if you can start with these smaller elements and then, of course, develop the case studies, the data points behind that, I'll gladly discuss with anyone. But I think that could be a really interesting way of transitioning our ways of doing procurement. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other insights from the others? It's a broad question. We can bring different views and perspectives from Sarango, Pavel, Jenny. Any?
Yeah, I would just, good that you mentioned this project, since it's actually under my agency, and they are excellent in driving innovation in public procurement. And they're also interested in finding cases on environment. I'm going to share the link to them in this chat. Is in Norwegian, but you have the contact information and you have some little films that you could see. And yeah, I think it's a very great initiative.
Thank you very much. I will then go to Sarango and Pavel, looking into this relationship between producing and developing countries, and how can we manage to retain value generation in the producing countries while implementing circularity into the value chain. We have seen the project in Mongolia, and we know the consumption in Europe, how it looks like, how are the plans for circularity in Europe, and how can we address the risk that circularity transfer value from producing to consuming countries? How can we ensure a just transition here? What are your thoughts on this, to you both?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina. Sarah, I hope it's okay if I start answering this question maybe. Yeah, as I think Sarango also displayed, we had in the first phase of the project in the last 4 years, we had a very strong focus on establishing a sustainable Mongolian wool and cashmere chain, but also what was very important to get all the actors, all the relevant actors on board to make it a business case for the companies, because they were not aware about the business potential of sustainability in general. And this was always a huge aim that every measure that we implement, we make sure why we implement this, because it's demanded by the European markets. And it has to transfer into increased sales, ideally, so that we have this motivation to further increase or improve sustainability. And obviously, when looking at the value chain, we implemented already several circularity aspects, as Sarah already mentioned in her presentation, but they were more like related upstream. So recycling of raw materials, recycling of production materials like wastewater, for example, recycling of or reuse of used materials in the processing phase. But what we did not yet address was how to improve sustainability from the sales, because usually the product is being produced in Mongolia. It is a long living product. It's a high quality product. So there are some circularity aspects per se in this product. But when you produce it on a sustainable but still linear measures in Mongolia, but then you sell it in Europe, and then you have circular economy related like measures that are upcoming in terms of increased repairs, increased reusability of the used garments, then I think we can be sure that this loop closing will not happen in Mongolia, because it doesn't make sense to send them back to Mongolia to upcycle them and send them then to Europe, but it will happen in Europe. And this might lead, in the worst case, to every successfully recycled used garment is one garment less sold in Mongolia and in the producing countries. And as especially Mongolian wool and cashmere, the sector is, after the extractive industry, it's the most important industry for the Mongolian society. And knowing the extractive industry, we can say that maybe this is some more societal, or one sector that offers more societal aspects, and we need to maintain those social benefits that are generated. But how can we ensure that those are generated also, or kept in the country also after the sales of the project? Maybe we need to talk about new business models. But this, as Sarah also said, I think it requires a lot of research, because we do not need to talk about upstream circularity measures. They are like related directly to resource efficiency, but those downstreams they do have trade-offs potentially.
Thanks, Pavel. Sarango, any compliment? Your thoughts? You are on mute.
Just to add, as I already mentioned that sustainable pasture land management and the protection of biodiversity is very important for us. And we are, the Mongolian processing companies and herders, are at the very first part of value chain. And my perception, I was observed that the international brands, fashion brands, they are paying insufficient attention to this very beginning chain. They are doing a lot of investment, they are doing a lot of effort with the Italian and Scottish and Chinese industries, who is transforming their material into the product, but they are ignoring what happens in Mongolia, what happens in their very first processing companies in Mongolia. So, of course, circularity here in Mongolian local producers, they're using almost 100% of the waste coming from the production in. But what the European consumer, European regulatory committee could help us is ask these fashion brands the impact on environmental impact and social impact at the very first point of value chain. Not just be happy with the impact in Italian or Chinese or end producer, or at the very ask what happens in Mongolia. Do you have that Mongolian herders? You are supplying from Mongolian herders, you are supplying from the Mongolian scouring plant or dehering plant. What happens there? Please prove us the environmental linkage, social impact, the proof that you are protecting with the Mongolians their biodiversity and pasture land, which is that's I think very good. And the idea to circular the Kashmir in Europe is a good. I support Powell because all this Kashmir is bought and transformed and used. And of course, here in Mongolia, we can clean and we can make when there is a holes, we have a service to do that. We have a knowledge, but this knowledge must be transferred to European. I know that there is a special platform, HAPS, to repair, to reuse and things. So the transfer of transfer knowledge to repair the Kashmir garments could be knowledge of could be transferred from the Mongolian producer to the end consumers through these kind of platforms.
Very important point, Sarango. Thank you very much. I think we go now to our last question, given the time left. That would be then addressed to Jenny. It was sent up front from Elena O'Rourke-Potoki. I hope I spell this right, from ICLE. That is about trade barriers. Some criteria or standards might be perceived as a trade barrier for third countries. How should we develop just and circular criteria that third countries outside the EU will be able to meet and will not cause perceived trade barriers? Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think this is an interesting and important question. And I would just first like to point out that human rights are absolute. So even though high-risk products are produced in developing countries, which have a need for these exports, we cannot have it at the price of human rights breaches. That saying, the WTO has clear regards that we cannot be holding developing countries outside public procurement, for instance. And I think with regards to requirements and criteria, it's really important to see how we can help the workers on the ground. And for instance, as I said in my talk, that there could be that you require factories to have certifications of SA 8000, for instance, which are auditing continuously workers' rights. And then you could also have requests for living wage and award criteria for having a social dialogue in the factories. So I think there are a lot of tools in public procurement that could help developing countries to get better working conditions.
Thank you very much. I give now back to Ferle.
Yes, thank you so much, Christina, for moderating this panel discussion, and thanks also to all speakers for their insights. I will share my screen. I will first share the link. So last part now is that you can go into connection with all speakers and with each other. This is a link to the spatial chat in the chat, and you see your avatar when you put in your name, and you can move through the room without your avatar to go to another place. And picking your avatar, you can go and listen. When you are close to someone, then you can hear them and you can talk to them. And so perhaps in the first room, if you come in, it might be more on a general level, like the story that Cynthia brought, and perhaps in this room, more in the bottom, it can be on for example, on the cases, and there are also questions on financial criteria, etc. So just move on and look throughout the room and talk to each other. And then this is the end of the official Circular Talk. So you can still continue the discussion in the LinkedIn group, Circular Procurement Learning Network. And you can also look at the presentation again in the stakeholder platform. So thank you so much.